Owner has to be there. The business won't really operate or won't operate well. The second reason is because their financials are in a mess. Mostly the books. Like you can't actually verify easily how the company is doing financially because the company can't produce good records. And so for most buyers or investors, they'll just walk away because there's so many companies that are going to market or hope to go to market. They're not going to waste time with a company that's, when you ask them for their financials, they'll say, well, I'm finishing up last year's taxes. I'll get that to you when I get the taxes done. That's an immediate
red flag. Christian, welcome to the Exit Guild. I'm so excited to have you with us today. And to get us started, I want to just see if you have any sort of powerful opinion to share with us. I know you have extensive experience with leadership and organizational development. What's one powerful insight that you have for business owners that are thinking about preparing to exit?
Well, it's a little bit of a downer to start out with, but really most of them will be unsuccessful. And so the good news, though, is that they can turn that around. It's not uncontrollable, but if they don't start soon enough, it's going to be hard to turn that around.
And I'm already getting off. I have this beautiful list of questions, and I'm already getting off track. You say it's going to be hard if they don't get started
It's
soon
going to be
enough.
impossible for most of them to do more than, I mean, I'm just being totally blunt. I've worked with this space for a long time. Most owners, you know the statistics around this, about 80% of owners will be unsuccessful in trying to exit their business. The best they can hope for is a controlled liquidation. And so I start out with that shock and kind of negative perspective, not because I am negative about this at all, but because I think that most owners need sort of that splash of cold water in the face. Because most of them just assume everybody will love their business as much as they do. And I have talked with so many owners who have very high revenue businesses, who have very profitable businesses that are completely non-sellable. And it's very hard for them to believe that somebody won't buy a business that's making them money hand over fist. But they won't, and there's reasons for that. And but there are reasons that they can solve and they can fix. They just have to be willing to. And they need to know what they are.
Yeah, so you mentioned that it's basically one of the reasons they won't be successful is, I want to say, time. They don't have it at the very beginning. They're not going to have enough time. They wait too long to start looking at things.
Yeah, if somebody comes to me and says, like I talked with some owners a few weeks ago, they want to be out by November. And so give themselves 2-3 months. There's not a whole lot you can do in that period of time. Fortunately, that pair of owners, their expectations were very modest, and so I think they'll be fine. But the biggest reasons to kind of just go into it.
Yeah, let's go into it.
But the two main reasons why business, and I'm talking more about small and medium-sized businesses. I'm not talking about, billion-dollar companies and things like that. That's a different category. But in the small and medium-sized space, the two primary reasons that businesses can't and won't sell is the first one is they have a dependency on the owner in some way. The owner has to be there. The business won't really operate or won't operate well. The second reason is because their financials are in a mess. Everything from mostly the books. Like you can't actually verify easily how the company is doing financially because the company can't produce good records. And so for most buyers or investors, they'll just walk away because there's so many companies that are going to market or hope to go to market. They're not going to waste time with a company that's, when you ask them for their financials, they'll say, well, I'm finishing up last year's taxes. I'll get that to you when I get the taxes done. That's an immediate
red flag.
Not going to with it. For most of the time, there's always an exception out there that proves me wrong, but generally, those are the two primary reasons.
Well, and you mentioned there's always the exception that proves you wrong, which sounds to me as if you've seen lots of these time and time again. You've seen lots of businesses, lots of financials, lots of business owners that are doing all of the heavy lifting. Can can you share with us what your background is? Because I know I just got started right into it. Share a little bit about your background. Who are
Yeah.
you? How did you get in this industry? And what exactly is it that you do to support business owners that are interested
Yeah.
in exiting or probably even scaling their business if
Yeah.
they have
Well,
one to be acquired?
I'm a consultant and an executive coach, and I specialize, and I'm a certified exit planning advisor, a CEPA. I specialize in working with fast growth companies, and specifically, also, I shouldn't say specifically, but also I work with companies that are looking at exits or secession, some kind of leadership or ownership transition. And so, the work for a fast growth company and for an exit or a secession underneath the hood is almost exactly the same. It's just a little bit of a difference, sort of at the end, so to speak. Like if they finally want to go to exit, or if they're going to change leadership at the top. Because really, to grow well, to be ready for an exit, for a successful secession, what you really need is a well-running company. And the
Yeah.
basics of that are the same across the board. So that's what I do. I've been doing that for 20 years. Um, I Short story, I got into the work that I do from a completely left field place. I was in international disaster relief and development work, and I worked all
Oh,
over the world. And my background in disaster zones and in conflict zones, I just would see that you could be in a very well-funded project in a very secure area, and you would have a hard time making your projects succeed if your team didn't get along well and wasn't led well, or if your community partners weren't led well or didn't get along well. On the other hand, you could be in the middle of a conflict and you could be totally underfunded and things were very insecure. But if your team was led well and you got along well and your partners were, you could get all kinds of things done. So I became fascinated with the dynamics surrounding leadership and teams and ended up pursuing that academically and then professionally. So I've been doing that now for a while.
well,
And
I've seen that you've written 3 books.
yeah, yeah,
One was on conflict, what is it, conflict resolution?
yeah. My
One is
first
that,
book is called Conflict and Leadership. Yeah.
was that, was your work, the work that you did through the international disaster relief, is that kind of what led to that book, or was it something else?
Yes, but not in probably any way that you would guess. So I was that particular, the genesis of that book was in what's now called South Sudan, the country of South Sudan. At the time, it was Southern Sudan. It was still one country in a civil war. So it was back in
Okay.
2003. So I was brought over by an agency to be part of a research team to help develop recommendations for how the agency could support a peace building process if there was peace in the country,
Mhm.
because there was negotiations for peace between the North and South. And so in preparation for that, how could our agency support that peace building process, since it was a prominent agency or in the country, or in Southern Sudan. And the research team that I was part of, long story short, the leader of the team and myself got stuck in an intractable conflict that we couldn't figure out. And so we actually split the team in half, conducted separate research processes, produced separate reports back to the leadership of the organization. Were sent separately to counseling to get our stuff sorted out. It was embarrassing. It was awful. I mean, I learned a lot, but it was an embarrassing experience to be there as experts or to be studying, to be able to
Mhm.
advise on peace building, and we couldn't get along ourselves. And that began a process for me of realizing I had better figure this out, because this was not the first conflict I had ever experienced that I wasn't able to resolve. And so that led through a long process of me learning about conflict resolution and handling things differently, which led to some insights to organizational issues that I noticed were not covered in other books that I had read about conflict resolution. And so I wrote my own book about that to try to provide something that I thought was short version of the story. Is I feel like most books on conflict resolution are addressing the symptoms of conflict. That would be like if you and I were in an argument, the book will tell us how to have a conversation, which is
Yes.
good, it's important. But what it doesn't talk about are all of the very likely organizational issues in terms of organizational culture, organizational processes or systems that probably could have been set up differently that would have mitigated us ever having a conflict or the intensity of it. And what I found is that if you do good work in the culture of the organization and in the systems and processes that the organization uses, you can dramatically reduce both the presence and the intensity of conflict. That's what the book's about.
Okay. Well, it sounds as if, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's good conflict resolution is a structural procedural thing in some ways. If we're getting
I mean, there's definitely
parts
an
of it.
interpersonal dynamic. So
Mm-hmm.
I talk, yeah, and I don't want to get, too
Yeah,
off
yeah,
the
yeah.
top. I can talk about any of my books for forever, but
Okay.
but I mean, the idea of the book is that conflict's an opportunity because it generates energy. It helps people identify there's something important here. And
Yes.
so it creates focus. And my encouragement in the book is that leaders should capture that energy instead of just being frustrated by it or trying to avoid it. Capture it, help identify what the important thing is, and then use that to grow the culture, the systems, the interpersonal relationships, and drive personal growth through the dynamic of conflict. And my experience is that you can do that. And if you do try to do that, it's never fun. Nobody wants it. It's not like, you don't sign up for that. But conflict's going to happen to all of us. It's there. So you might as well figure out, how do I grab this and get value out of it that benefits everyone, hopefully, as opposed to we just survive this somehow or try to get rid of the people that are causing us problems.
When in your work, well, and thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah,
I'm
that's
curious.
kind of a detour there, but
Well, it's a yes, it's a detour, and I'm always fascinated with people that have had the ability to start and complete the writing of a book, and you've done three.
yeah,
And when you talk about conflict and your view of conflict and really getting to that root cause and how it can be used as a uh, I'm like, conflict is a collaboration tool. I don't know if you let it be.
yeah,
The question I have, because in my experience is not as vast as yours in exit planning, I see the need for people to have the ability to manage differences,
yeah,
resolve conflict, even as they make the decision to begin the process of exiting. When I say begin, I'm talking about even taking into consideration, is exiting something we want to do? And I think everyone should have an exit strategy in place. However, the conversations people have, they're not easy conversations. We are managing differences.
yeah, yeah.
And is there some sort of a structure that you bring in when you go into an organization with your experience that helps people have these conversations in a healthy way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a set of structures kind of depending on the situation that I'm dealing with. And so that's actually one of the reasons, it's one of the things I like about working with exits is because they're so dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
The event of it or the preparation for it. And so, all of these different skills that I've developed as a consultant and as a coach and as a mediator and all these things, they all come into play, or they're
Mm-hmm.
all tools that get used not necessarily all of them in every situation, but there's always you're going to do more than one thing. You're not going to just go in and do the same thing over and over again. All exits are different. The people wanting to exit are different. The acquirers and all these kinds of things. It's just I just think they're fascinating environments. But yes, I mean, one of the things that I mean, to speak simply, it's hard to be real specific about how I would handle all exits, but I would say one of the things that I try to do at the beginning that does help reduce potential conflict is most exiting owners, because they've not been through this before most of the time, they tend to underestimate or not appreciate where conflict is likely to emerge. Mm-hmm. And so it's very, very similar, I think, to talking to your parents about estate planning or about long-term care, or about your parents and your siblings are probably not going to want to, I mean, many of them are not really going to want to talk about it, and they assume it'll all just sort of work out, or they'll have very simple ideas like, well, we'll just divide everything equally. Mm. But when everything includes nostalgic items and heirlooms, and like, what does that mean? How do you divide that equally? And so I think there's a lot of things in business where there's assumptions about how we'll do this, and it's not really well thought through. And so what I try to do is, because I can anticipate many of these because I've seen scenarios, is to try to help create a same page and similar expectations for the key stakeholders, which aren't even necessarily only the owners. Like, it could be spouses, it could be other family members. There's other people who have a stake and sometimes end up having influence in the process that aren't the owners themselves. So I try to create a level of same page amongst the group, if there's a group, so that decisions can be made more easily. And we've hopefully not just resolved the conflict, but avoided it altogether. So that, like, a homework assignment I gave a client that I was meeting with last week was to go to their board, who right now, they really believe their board's passive. They're happy with whatever they do. They're not really that concerned. They were all kind of gifted shares in this company years ago, and they've kind of gotten what they wanted out of it, and they don't really care. And I was like, yes, but when you've got a $6 million check in your sweaty little hands, all of a sudden you don't know what emotions are going to pop up in people, and it tends to get weird. And so if in advance of that time period, when money's more abstract and it's not real feeling, let's try to make some decisions around some of these key questions that are as of yet unresolved. And because if you do that now, there's a greater chance there won't even be a conflict. And then where there might be, we've got some things we can go back to that will help us navigate it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It sounds as if you go in the door and just get people used to the idea that, yes, there are going to be differences, and we need to get everyone on the same page. And by getting one on over the same page, and probably some sort of a rhythm of conversations, that there's not going to be any surprises at the end. And as you said, I can visualize this, a $6 million check in your sweaty hand. So when that happens, the emotions aren't flying wild. They've thought through them. They've discussed everything ahead of time.
People that normally, right, families experience this all the time, that you have, loving siblings that normally get along fine, enjoy each other. They look forward to Thanksgivings and Christmases or whatever. And then there's an issue with mom or dad, and they're sick and they're unhealthy, or they die, and then there's the estate. And all of a sudden, unexpected things come up, unexpected emotions come up. And they're not always easily explained. And I don't know that they necessarily need to be explained, but they're there and they have to be dealt with, because people are having to deal with them. And just like good estate planning, and an exit's not a death, but I do feel like there's a lot of uh, owners that are not well prepared to exit. It often feels kind of like that to them, especially if they haven't decided what they want to do afterwards. But yeah, it's just basically there's things that you can anticipate that are pretty common. And if you have some clarity around certain areas in advance, then you can avoid a lot of issues, a lot of challenges. And it's not really that complicated. It honestly, it's like if you're going to have, in this one case of this client that I'm referencing, if you have two owners that are going to be responsible for the exit process, then let's make sure that all of the owners have identified, we don't want to sell the business for less than this. We only want owners that have certain qualities, like buyers that have certain qualities to them that are going to be like A, B, and C, and that they're, whatever other parameters are important to them, so that the two owners that are involved in the exit process are free to handle the negotiations, and they're not running into the scenario of negotiating a deal, bringing it back for approval, and then it gets blown up because people, the rest of the board's like, where did this come from? But they've already said, okay, these are the, it's kind of like, I don't care what kind of a dessert you come back with as long as it's a chocolate cake. I'm like, all right, there's a lot of chocolate cakes, but that narrows me down quite a bit.
It does. Right? Yes.
And so that kind of idea of, as long as they've given a definition of what they're looking for, it makes the negotiation process more manageable and simpler for these two. And that's less likely to get unintentionally blown up because a shareholder all of a sudden changes their mind and wants something different.
Yeah, I like to call them success criteria.
Yeah.
And they're just getting those done in advance, which sounds like a very smart thing to do.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this interview, you mentioned that 80% of the people that want to go to market, sell their business, don't succeed. Part of it is time. They don't give themselves enough time. How much time, in your experience, does someone really need to get the most out of, I want to say, get the most out of their business, if you will, or to be more successful at exiting?
Yeah, I would say, just speaking broadly, there's going to be everybody at different places, but speaking broadly, I would say that once an owner, well, I'm going to answer this question two different ways. One is, if you're kind of waiting till the last second to think about this, I would say once you feel like you're within about 3 years of an exit, at that point, that's about enough runway that you should be able to make whatever changes you need to make. It's not a whole lot more runway than what you need, but it's about enough, because things take longer than what people anticipate, because you're still running your business and you got life going on and all of these different things. The other part of it is almost everything that you need to do to prepare your business for an exit, you can do 15 years before you want to sell your business, and then just have an optimally running business that's ready to sell or to expand or to do whatever you want with at any time, because it's optimally running. So having a business ready for exit doesn't mean you're going to fall out of it somehow and not have a business anymore. It just means that it's really going to be running so well that if you decide, I don't want to be in it day to day anymore, you can start to, and many of my clients do this. They hire me to say, hey, I want to exit my company. And then we start working on these things. The business starts running so smoothly and becomes so profitable, and it's just fun again. And they're able to hire management that can run the business. And next thing you know, they're just checking in periodically. They're not actively running, like managing the business, but it's a well-managed business, and they're able to step back. And when they actually want to sell, they can do that. So they have these options to go whatever direction you want. The concept I like to use is, most sellers, for that 20% who are successful, most of them will be asked to do what's called an earnout. So the buyer, and if I'm advising the buyer, this is what I would advise. You want to mitigate the risk as much as possible. You want to put all of the risk back on the seller if you can. And so you're going to tell the seller, hey, why don't you stay and work for another 2 or 3 years? Let's say we sell the business for $10 million. We'll buy it for $10 million. we'll give you 4 million now, and then for the next 2 years, we want you to stay here and hit these certain sales marks, production marks, growth metrics, whatever. You don't own the business anymore. You don't get to make all the decisions, but you need to perform. And basically, we want you to earn all of the money that we will then give back to you as payment for the business. That's a basic earnout structure. And it's smart because it removes the risk from the buyer. What most buyers need in that earnout in terms of making sure there's a business that can run without the owner, we know what most of those things are. And so it's all part of the standard due diligence that an acquirer or a lender would look at. And so what I encourage sellers to do is do all of the earnout up front. When they own the business, when they have control over the business, do all of the things that a buyer is likely to ask them to do. Then when it comes time for a sale, they can ask for a premium price. And more importantly than the price, they can ask for ideal terms that suits them. And they can begin to actually start to shop their business out there as opposed to hoping somebody will come and buy their business. They can actually go to buyers and say, hey, by the way, we're going to, they're ideal buyers. They can pick their 3 ideal buyers and go to them. And the chances of them actually being heard and being, responded to go up significantly. And that reduces the time of the sale process. It's better all the way around.
You mentioned if they do this due diligence, essentially while they still own the business, that they can go to buyers with their ideal terms. Can you give some examples? And I know this is kind of like out of the blue, but what are some examples of ideal terms that an owner may have? Just in case people are wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it depends a lot on what an owner's looking for, right? Some owners really want to be re-employed back into the business, and they want to know, they just want to take their chips off the table. They don't want to own the business anymore, but they want to know they're going to be employed at a certain salary with a certain job, and they're set for the next 10 years. And so they want to be able to know that that's part of the conditions of the sale is I'm in the business for this amount of time. And so being able to negotiate for that, because as a buyer, to commit to employing in somebody is a risk because you don't know how that's going to work out. And so you want to make sure that you've set things up in such a way that it looks like it's not a risk, but it's a mitigating decision, a risk mitigator for you to keep me around. You want it to look that way. So that's one option. That's kind of an extreme one side of the story. The other side of the story is the owner that says, hey, when I sell, I want you to write me a fat check and I want to be out of there. And if you want to give me a call once in a while, that's fine. How about this? For the next 6 months, write me a check, for $20,000 a month. I'll pick up the phone. If you need me, I'll fly up there and, point to the part of the machine that needs to get fixed, to hit with the hammer, and then you're good. And so that's the other ideal, which is basically that they're not required and can't really be required to be an employee because the company functions so well. The owner already only checked in with the management team once a month already and clearly doesn't have to be there for the business to run. But they do understand a lot and they know a lot. And maybe the buyer wants access to their brains or their experience and will pay however, much on top of the acquisition price, they'll pay in a consulting fee. So that's kind of those are very simple or simplistic, I think, two sides of the way different people might choose ideal terms.
Yeah, it's a nice dichotomy or two sides of the scale that someone may be looking
but
for.
It's all based off of really what the owner thinks. This would be ideal for me. This is what I want. So how do I create a business that is so attractive to a buyer, so ready to sell that they feel like they have to have this business. They can't pass it up. And I can dictate, I've got some room to dictate terms or at least negotiate terms. It's harder to do if your business is a fixer-upper because then it's almost like they're doing you a favor.
Mm-hmm.
But if your business is really well run, then you've got room to. And I don't know if you get this, I get emails or calls or meetings frequently from all over the country, from private equity firms and from other buyers that are looking for businesses, and they're all struggling. I mean, they'll frequently say, they'll look at from a pool of 1,000 businesses, they'll actually review 100 of them or 200 of them, and it'll come down to one acquisition or a couple of acquisitions that'll come out of that pool. And so and most sophisticated acquirers in that equity space will screen through or filter through that many businesses before they find one that seems right to them. And this is using well-developed filters so they don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but they're still spending a lot of time on it. So my point is, it's not guesswork to try to figure out what makes an attractive, well-running business. Let's do those things first. Then when you go to market, you're more likely to stand out. And when they see you, they're going to immediately recognize that's a good deal.
Nice.
It may or may not be a good deal for them, but they'll recognize it is. And they have friends and they may tell their friends about it.
I think that's a really good point. And I want to go back to the idea of a well-running business, and a well-running business is run by human beings, their leaders, their management team, their executive team.
Yeah.
In your experience, what have been, or do you have a story about maybe an organization, a business owner being surprised by their team not being ready for an exit? Have you seen that happen? Some management teams that are just not ready for an exit.
Ready in the sense of like a buyer wouldn't want to retain them, or ready in the sense emotionally they're not ready for the idea of a transfer in leadership or ownership.
Thank you for making that distinction. A buyer wanting to retain them. So buyers are looking at this organization. Numbers may be good. Maybe they've been relying a little too much on the owner, but overall, maybe they don't have they might just be a mediocre management team.
Yeah. So, I mean, none of my clients have been in that role because I help them address those things.
You screened them out.
Yeah, well, it's not that I screen them out. It's that if that's where they're at, I help them prepare for it.
Got it.
So I don't have like a personal client story of a client went to sell, because these are the things that I'm helping them with. I would have failed them if they got to that point and that happened.
Well, maybe a better...
in my ecosystem, you hear stories of that, of businesses that are acquired, and then the whole management team has to be let go because they can't perform. And there's actually the very first business, it's across the street here from where I'm at. Very first business I worked with on exit strategy. Before I was a SEPA, before I knew anything about this, the owner called me, wanted some help with some things. And that entire business, over the period of just a few years, first the management team was gutted, then some of the other key services and processes were gutted. It was just kind of slowly, it's gone. It's not there anymore.
Wow.
So there was this long process. It was not an inexpensive acquisition. And the buyers, I don't believe they initially had a strategy of just cannibalizing the business and pulling part of it out. Maybe that's what they did, but that isn't what they told the seller, because the seller specifically wanted a buyer that would take care of the employees and the customers. And but I just watched these shifts happen. And so I think that does happen, and people don't always prepare for it or anticipate it. It isn't even always necessarily that the management team is not prepared. I think there's frequently an assumption that acquirers are real sophisticated people. and they
Oh.
really know what they're doing, and they don't always. And so it's not that they're, I want to be careful how I say that. um, it's not that they're not sophisticated people. It's that they aren't necessarily sophisticated when it comes to the dynamics of an acquisition and merging or bringing a business into the fold. That's
Mm.
more precisely what I mean. And because these are always, almost always, very, very smart, intelligent, successful people. But this is such a weird little world, and I sometimes compare it to like a junior high dance where everyone's afraid to talk to each other openly, and everyone's
Hmm.
assumes that girl's so cute she would never talk to me, he's so whatever, he would never talk, and they're nervous to talk. And when they finally do, the conversations are funny and not very real, and that's very common. And it kind of surprised me early on, but to find that, I've talked to enough acquisitions teams and acquirers now, um, to know that, I mean, there can be all sorts of ego, but
Hmm.
they don't always really understand what they're doing, which is why, McKinsey or other firms like that will tell you 60% of acquisitions fail to return value. And again, that side of the equation is also not really that much of a mystery. It has to do with overlooking certain things. There's certain dynamics that are foreseeable that many people just choose not to see. I think because acquisitions I think it's because it's an emotional process. Like even being
Yeah.
able to write a big fat check, even if it's not my money, it's like, wow, I am somebody. Look at all these zeros that I get to write, even if it's not my zero.
You mentioned that you don't have any direct experience with or taking a company to market and having them sell with a mediocre management team because your job is to come in and really assess the situation. And if there are some opportunities for growth with the management team, your job is to help them fix those things. Can you share a story about how you were able to go in and boost up a management team and prepare them for a
Yeah.
successful exit?
Yeah. I can share a story with a client right now. They've not yet exited, but I'm in that process of building that team. So I've been working with them for 3.5 years.
Okay.
The first year or so, I worked directly with the owner. And then after that, we started folding. They didn't have a management team in place. It was a small company. It was about a $4 million company. They didn't have a team in place. They had people, and they were all had informal roles, which is very common.
Mm.
People wearing a lot of different hats. They're kind of responsible for this or that, but they don't have formal positions and so on. And so what we did is we started including them in a management decision process. So I would meet with them monthly. We came up with did some strategic planning with them. And then we had a regular meeting cycle that we would work on to implement the plan, create accountability within the team, and so on. And so what I did with them is I helped them learn to plan, learn to annually plan, quarterly plan, monthly plan, how to have accountability conversations, how to hold each other to account, how to have those conversations and make those things work, how to manage to metrics and manage to clear objectives and not just, read my mind, don't get it wrong type management. Um, we also had to make some really hard decisions around, it's not my decisions, but it's the owner eventually made some hard decisions around members of the team who wanted to be in management. They wanted the title and the recognition of being in management, but they
Mhm.
didn't want to do the work or the responsibilities of management. And these were team members that had been there for a very long time, nice people, but there was that challenge. And so um, they were, as I framed it to the client, they were kind of given a Y in the road. This path leads in this direction, this path. And none of it was like, you're here, you're out. It was like, but this path leads to management and greater responsibility, but this is what we need from you. This path leads to less responsibility and all of the things that go with that. We love you either way, but you got to make a decision because we need somebody to fulfill these management responsibilities. And those why in the road conversations caused a number of people to decide they were just out, and which was hard, but that company will triple revenues within a year, largely because of that decision. Not entirely, but largely because they discovered that some people they really liked and cared about were functioning more as anchors than as, propellers, to whatever the analogy is I'm working with there. But which is unfortunate, but that was part of that. So they've been able to bring in people that are willing to step up to the needs and where they're going to go. And so, I don't know if the owner will ultimately exit on the timeline that was originally discussed, because now the business is becoming more self-running. She's able to take, vacations during their busy time and so on. And so she may decide to stay on longer. I don't know. Point is it doesn't matter, right? Whatever decision's right for her is right for her. She'll have more options now than she did before. And when she's ready to exit, the likelihood of her getting the price she wants at the terms that she wants are much higher.
Well, and that gets to your point, going again back to the beginning. One of the reasons 80% of the people don't succeed, business owners don't succeed, is they're not prepared. But the people that you work with, given that you have enough runway and depending on what exactly that they're looking for, but what the people that you work for are using exit planning as a business strategy, having a well-running business.
Yeah.
And it leaves them with options.
Yeah. And that's what I describe to a lot of my clients. Like, whether you exit, whether you just step away from active management, whether you bring in a family member to run the company, all of that can be decided. You can decide now, but it doesn't have to be decided now. What we have to do is get the company to be optimally running. And then at a certain point, you have all kinds of options. And what we want to do is be as free as possible, so that if somebody, like a different client, and it's starting to happen now, but I used to say, what you want to do is be ready for somebody to come to you, express interest in you as a company. You're able to share information with them, and you don't embarrass yourself in the process. Because he had been through a conversation where a company had expressed interest. Again, very, very smart, successful company had said, we're kind of interested in, maybe, are you interested in selling? They had shared their financial information, and then they never heard back from that company again. And it was embarrassing to them. Now that they weren't talked about, there wasn't stuff like that, but they just felt like we had kind of exposed ourselves, and then there was no communication. We showed them all of our stuff, and we didn't even hear back.
Yeah. So what is it? They got ghosted. They got ghosted by a potential buyer.
Yeah. And they felt bad about it, and it left a lot of bad feelings and so on. And I said, well, the potential buyer, because I knew him, I said, the potential buyer probably didn't understand, how to relate to you or how to approach. But also, your financials were a mess. And so I don't, that's why I didn't call you back, because there was nowhere to go with it. And maybe they didn't know how to tell you that. I don't know. But let's make sure that you never have to go through that again. And so that the next time somebody comes to you, they may be similar to that person, where they don't fully know how to have the conversation either. They're successful, they're making tons of money, they're doing all sorts of big things, but they don't really know how to do this acquisition process well. And you can actually, because you're going to be more knowledgeable, you'll be able to help guide the conversation and prepare for it. And when you show them your information, when you get to that appropriate time for that, you'll feel good about what you're showing them. And what's been kind of fun is this year there's been two unsolicited inquiries into their readiness to sell. Three, actually, three unsolicited inquiries. And it's been interesting watching that owner coming back and saying, somebody came and talked to me, and he's realizing now he handles these conversations completely differently. He has insight into the process. He may even know more about what's going to happen than the person asking him. And so it just gives him a lot of confidence to enter these conversations well. Also, he can begin to evaluate, what do I want my exit to really feel like?
Oh,
And
that's
so I'm
incredible.
even suggesting that, yeah, why don't you go down the road with one, like the most recent person that inquired? So, you don't have to make it, it's not an all or nothing. It's like dating. You get to know each other over a period of time. And, or it's kind of like dating, it's not the same, but have a few conversations. And if things keep feeling good and seeming right, we'll keep having more conversations, and I'll guide you on what the conversation should be about. But you don't have to say we're going to sell to you right off the bat because they just expressed interest to you. Um, and they're going to be making up their own mind and their own decisions. But you can go into it knowing confidently, not only are you a good company, but you now are thinking about, what kind of a buyer do I want? And how do I know if they're that kind of a buyer?
It sounds like you instill confidence in the people that you work with so that they show up with their best, I want to say the best version of themselves from a knowledge perspective. Removes a lot of the mystery. And as I know, this is not necessarily conflict resolution, but it is management of differences. You teach them how to manage differences and navigate the whole exit planning journey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
I think
think,
it's admirable.
well, thank you. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of giving them confidence, but now that you're saying that, I think that that is often what happens. And I think for most business owners who normally feel confident in their business, they've been successful, they've been running the company for years. So it's a good part of their life that they like.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't like going into this situation where they don't understand it. It's maybe the biggest decision they'll make, and they feel like they're the only ones that don't understand what's going on. That's not a good feeling for anyone. So I think being able to help them not be in that position does help. And for many of these acquisition or exit scenario conversations where you have an inquiry coming in from a potential buyer and the potential seller, like the junior high dance scenario, they often don't understand, like the potential buyer often isn't aware how precious the baby is to the
Mm-hmm.
owner. And so they will say things or ask questions that are 100% appropriate in their intent, but they come across as demeaning or rude or too fast or too forward or whatever. And they're not aware of it, and the seller's not aware of what the buyer needs to know. And so they're just not sure how to handle the conversation. And so just helping them have realistic expectations sort of reduces some of the intensity of the conversation so that it's more objective and more useful to both of them.
As you were talking about the buyer, and I don't know why this just came into my mind. This feels kind of random, but I'm thinking because you connected it to dating. Oh, there's different types of dates. You can go on a date with someone that's a little too forward, too fast. You can go on a date with someone that's quiet, that doesn't talk much or share. And so in my head, I started creating different avatars of buyers based on dating. It's just
Yeah.
random.
Well, I think that would be you could run with that. I think there's enough parallels in it that I think it helps that framework, that the way you were framing it. I hadn't thought about it quite in those terms either, but I do think that it does help people recognize that it's a decision-making process, not a decision that
Mm-hmm.
has to or should be made immediately. And I think creates that awareness of some of the complexities of the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, right? Because in dating, there's this unspoken negotiation of will we or won't we see each other again,
Yes.
and how much more do I let you see about me or know about me versus before? And there's this kind of, and that's the same thing in the business until you get up to the letter of inquiry and you get up to the, you know, um, disclosure agreements and all those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things that non-disclosure agreements and so on, and then everything's shown, and that's if you're not ready for it, is a hard process for most sellers.
We'll talk about being vulnerable.
Yeah,
You have to be so vulnerable in
yeah,
that, or open to being vulnerable in that
yeah,
experience. And you prepare the clients that you work with to, you prepare the organizations, you help them show up with confidence, you give them the ability to have these meaningful conversations with buyers. And your clients are so prepared by the time they work with you for, it could be 1, 2, 3, like you said, this other one is 3.5 years,
right.
that they can get a call and they're ready, they're prepared, they're not flustered because they understand the journey, and they
Yeah,
understand that there are different types of people that may date them.
yeah.
So
And for one of my clients, we're actually the strategy we're going to use. This is one of the ones that's been getting the unsolicited inquiries, but
okay.
we're actually going to pursue a strategy of identifying their ideal buyers and then
Mm,
going to them and saying, if you're interested, before we really go to the market, we'd like you to get, we would like you to ask us out. And so, basically picking a few that they really think are a good match and we think are, because for this company, they really care about their team and they want to make sure their team's not going to be discarded,
mm,
and they've got a good team and they have a very unique product and service that they offer, and they want to make sure that that's still going to be available afterwards. And so they want someone that's going to take care of it and not, accidentally kill the business or do
yeah.
something weird with it or something like that. And so they want a buyer that understands what they're buying and is going to take care of their people and so on. The strategy, the initial strategy, if they don't sell internally, which is one of my recommendations, that they consider structuring for an internal sale to some of their staff.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't do that, then let's go and find 3 or 4 or 5 potential buyers. Let's structure a way of going to them and seeing if they're interested. I think that there's a high likelihood that they'll find a buyer that way. But if they don't, at least we tried that first, and then you could start expanding the market out to some of these other kinds of buyers. But yeah, but they have options. I never would have introduced them to potential buyers like a year ago. I wouldn't have introduced them because I know it would have just embarrassed them because they were just not.
Mm.
They're close. They were closer a year ago than they were 3 years ago, but it just wouldn't have. The buyer would have said no. And so I wouldn't have created that environment. Also, because I want to protect my reputation with the buyers, because they're going to know if I introduce them to them, because I'm not a broker. So it's a personal relationship. Like, hey, I think you
Mm-hmm.
guys should take a look at these guys. So I want to keep that intact. I want to make sure I'm offering that I'm matchmaking a good potential match. Whether or not they say yes, they both should recognize this could have worked.
Because of the quality of the business. You're
Because of the
bringing,
quality. Well, even if they decide not to, they should have seen
yeah,
like, okay, I can see why we were introduced. This made sense.
right. So we were talking about the dating. It's like an arranged marriage, and there was some agreement on your side
Yeah, at least
with,
there's that potential for it to be that way, and not an arranged marriage, but more of like setting people up on a date and
okay.
giving them the opportunity to decide if they want to move forward. But a good friend will set people up who at least can enjoy each other's company, whether or not they decide to do it.
Mm.
And so so I'm thinking about both sides of this. And so for me, if I'm going to introduce somebody, I need to make sure that they're ready to be introduced, which
And
doesn't mean perfect, right? Nobody's going to be perfect. No organization is going to be perfect. And so some of my work is actually helping them decide, you know what, you don't need to work on this right now. Like that can be a new owner's problem, but these are the things that are super important to hand off. This other stuff, it's kind of like, should you fix this up on your house before you sell it? It's like, you know what, they're going to change it out anyways. So
yeah,
probably not worth it right now.
I think that's the house analogy that you just gave. I think is perfect in terms of how you prioritize things, what's important to solve immediately so that you're prepared, and those things that the other owner, the buyer, is potentially going to change.
Yeah.
That is very easy and clear
Yeah.
to understand. I think most people can get that.
That's an analogy I do use frequently in the sense of, okay, there's certain things like if you got electrical problems, you got plumbing problems, you need to fix all that stuff. And then when you start getting to like curb appeal and things like that, you don't have to fix that up to sell it. That stuff just increases the price.
Yes.
And so at least in today's market, you can sell almost anything, at least where I'm at. But so we differentiate between what's required to make a sale happen. And then after we've got that done, let's focus on what we want to do to opt. And then at a certain point, if you repaint your mailbox, is it going to make that much of a difference? Probably not. So,
yeah. Well, I know I have a feeling, at least I'm a talker, so I have so many questions and I could talk for a lot longer. But I respect your time, and maybe one day down the road we can do this again. But before I let you go free into your day, I have two more questions. The first one is, besides your books, so you have 3 books out there, what book do you recommend to business owners? What are 1 or 2 books that you recommend to business owners that you work with to read?
oh, stumped me there.
Oh,
I think that is very situationally dependent,
okay.
based on their specific needs. Like there's a book, and I'm going to forget the title of the book, so it makes it hard for the conversation. There's a book called Buy Back Your Time. I believe that's the title. I can't remember the author, but that's a book that recently I've been recommending to some owners because it helps them shift out of thinking that they're doing their business or their team favors by doing everything themselves. And it helps them get more comfortable with the idea of starting to remove themselves from portions of the business in a structured way. And it helps them understand the value of that. And so there's both like real practical exercises and then also an understanding. So that's been a recent book that I've recommended to a number of sellers. I'm trying to think of others. I mean, I think, Chris Snyder's book, Walking to Destiny, is a fantastic book in terms of just getting an understanding of the exit process and what it looks like. And so that's another book that I think it's worth reading in that regard. There's another one too. It's called, my memory is not great for this. I want to say, I believe the author's name is Crabtree. It's like simple numbers, simple finances, something like that. I can't remember the name of the title, but basically he looks at, well, that's a good book in the sense, I can't remember what it is, but it helps people understand business finances if they're not familiar with it.
Okay.
There's another book. Christina Gamache wrote a book called Profit Not Loss. And it's targeting, she says it's targeting women-owned businesses. I think it's 100% legitimate and useful for anyone. I think it's perfect for small business owners because it uniquely, I've never seen a book like it that discusses both business financials and what you need to look at and understand, but also the interplay between your business's financial performance and your own personal wealth and managing your own finances and that interplay between the two. Because for almost all owners of smaller businesses that aren't C corporations and so on, there's so much interplay between it that a book that actually addresses it like that, I think is valuable. So that's another book I'd recommend.
Sounds fascinating. It sounds like one I'm putting on my list. I have not read
It's a
that
great
one.
book. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with? Maybe some words of wisdom for these business owners that are maybe they're actively exiting now or they're thinking about exiting?
Yeah, well, I would say that I don't know if there's a word of wisdom, but I would just say don't. This is a good thing to not leave off. It's a good thing to
Mm,
do now to start preparing, and preparing for an exit is 94% to make up a number about building a really well-running business that's more fun to run. And so it
mm,
isn't so much about like planning your death and measuring yourself for your casket, which is what I think a lot of people get in mind. It's really more about just building a fantastic business. And so if you embrace that concept and you make it fun, even though parts of it will be challenging, but you have that sort of idea around it, and you begin now, even if you're not thinking or you don't know when you're ready to exit, um, when the opportunity or need comes for an exit, you'll be ready, and it'll be a much more positive, much easier experience, and you'll get more of what you want out of it. You've right. Every entrepreneur you and I have ever met has
yeah.
a painful story. If they're successful, a painful story about
Yes.
sleep nights, not knowing how to make payroll, not getting paid because they're paying other people, risking everything because they had to take another loan out on something. There's all
Yeah.
these stories of what it took for them to get there. And I hate the idea of somebody putting that much work and effort into it and then kind of losing so much of
Mm,
it at the end because they didn't prepare for that exit. And it's avoidable. So I'll conclude with that. You can
okay.
do well, but you got to prepare.
How do people reach you? What's the best way to reach out to
My
you?
website's the best way, www.christianmuntean.com. And people can reach me there. They can get access to resources. If you go into the services page and you're curious about exiting, you can get free resources in terms of, estimating your business value,
Hmm.
evaluating how ready you are yourself for a sale, and so on. So there's lots of free resources, tons of free resources.
Okay. And you work with people nationwide, business owners nationwide,
Yeah, I work with people. I've worked with people internationally, actually,
internationally? Okay.
but mostly when it comes to exit strategy, it's mostly around the country.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
it's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
you are very welcome. Have a wonderful day